Hi guys, welcome to my channel. My name is Sabrina. In today's tutorial, I'll be demonstrating how to make a 3-yard chandelier quilt. It was a free pattern I got online from a website called socanshe.com. She has lots of free patterns on there, lots of 3-yard quilt patterns. Give her website a look. I'll link her website in my description below if you want to check her out. But like I said, I chose to do this chandelier quilt. And here's a little sneak peek of it. I think it turned out pretty awesome. But in the tutorial, you will see I'm cutting fabric for 2 different quilts. This one and a blue one. The blue one's pretty much ready to go. I just have to sew the squares together. This one I was in a hurry for. I have this made for someone in particular and I wanted to get it sent out to her. So I will be doing the quilting myself. I'll most likely do a video on that. And I'm really excited because I just picked up a piece of equipment that is going to help me with this quilting process. So I'm really excited about that. I'll be doing an unboxing on that, so keep an eye out for that. In the pattern, I do change up the cutting and sewing instructions. I don't do it exactly the way she has it. I think that the way I did it was a lot faster. It was more precise. It was definitely faster when it come to pressing. I think it made the quilt come together a lot faster. So keep an eye out for that. If you were to download the pattern and try to follow my tutorial, my cutting and sewing instructions are different the way it is in the pattern on the website. So just keep that in mind. So I hope you enjoy watching. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have. So yeah, so I hope you enjoy the tutorial, whether it's just casually watching something just for relaxation or whatever, but I like to watch the videos for relaxation and it kind of just calms me down, and I love looking at all the pretty fabrics. But so yeah, I hope you enjoy. Please like and subscribe, and happy sewing. Thank you. Okay. For this 3-yard quilt, this chandelier quilt, I am going to be cutting fabric for 2 quilts. So for those 2 quilts, I will need 3 fabrics for each one. We need the focal fabric or focus fabric, fabric A. So fabric A is going to be these 2 for me. Then we need fabric B. I'm using these for my fabric B. Fabric C, I'm using this. This will be my binding for this one. This will be my backing for this one. And this is going to be my binding and backing for this one. So I'm going to get started on cutting, and I am going to try to cut fabric for both of these at the same time. And then I'm going to kind of batch sew some things, and I am cutting out the fabric a little bit different than the way it is in the pattern. Okay, so I have both focal fabrics lined up on my mat. I have them lined up on this bottom line here to just try to make it square and even. So what I need to do now is trim off this edge to give me a nice even square edge to start cutting the strips for the binding. So I'm going to cut the big stuff first and get that out of my way, and then start on the small stuff. So you want to make sure you have all 4 layers under your ruler, that you're going to be trimming all 4 layers to make them even. Okay, there we go. Okay, take your time with this. Throw those in your scrap bin. So now I'm going to do my best to flip this over because I am left-handed. Keep my sides even. And now I'm going to use my ruler to cut. I'm not going to use the mat to take measurements. I'm going to use my ruler. My ruler is 6 inches wide, and I need 5 strips of 4.5 inches. So I'm going to line the edge of my fabric up with the 4.5 inch mark on my ruler. So just make sure that your fabric is lined up here, same place down here on your ruler. And then we're just going to cut these. I like to make sure the fabric cut all the way before I move my ruler. So we need 5 strips. Okay, so we'll move on to the next step. Okay, so now we need 24 2.5 inch by 2.5 inch squares. So I'm going to cut a strip of fabric at 2.5 inches. We should be able to get 16 squares out of one strip. So I'm going to cut this at 2.5. Okay, now if I cut another strip, I don't need a full 16 squares. So if I got 16 out of this strip, I only need 8 more. So actually I'm going to go ahead and cut the 4.5 inch strips that I need. So we need 12 4.5 by 4.5 inch squares. So I'm going to go ahead and cut another strip for 4.5 by 4.5. This is going to be for the center squares that go down the center of the pattern. Okay, so this is for the center squares that are going to go down the center of the pattern. So we need 12 of these 4.5 by 4.5 inch squares. So one strip is going to give me, about 9 squares. And we need a total of 12. So I'm gonna have to like kind of fussy cut this now, because I only need I only need 4 of the 4.5 by 4.5 squares out of this. So I need about 18 inches of fabric here at 4.5. So I'm going to cut this. Make sure your ruler doesn't move on you like it just did me. And I'm not subcutting these yet. I'm going to show you a shortcut, because the pattern has you cutting all these out individual squares, 4 by 4, and then sewing everything to the sides onto the 4x4. But I'm going to take a little shortcut. So I need some more 2.5-inch squares. I just wanted to make sure I had enough fabric because I only have 1 yard of this fabric here. I have a little extra of this black. I hope this is going to make sense. It'll make sense as I push through. So I need some more 2.5-inch squares. So far out of this focus fabric, I have the binding, the borders. The borders are cut. I have my 4.5-inch strips for cutting the 4.5 by 4.5 squares we're going to need. And I have 1 strip here for the 2.5 by 2.5 we're going to need. That's going to be for the diamond going up the center. And then I need some more 2.5 by 2.5. So then I think we're done with this fabric. So I only need 20 inches. So that is just about what I need right there. So I'm going to cut this off right here. Then I can use this for something else. So 20 inches. 2.5-inch strip. This will make sense, I hope, after I start sewing it together. I'm not subcutting all of these into little strips or little pieces. For the focus fabric. Now I need to cut that out of this. Okay, for a recap, we have 2 for that color, 2 4.5 strips, 2, 2, and 2. So we have 5 4.5-inch strips for the border. We have another 4.5-inch strip and a partial 4.5-inch strip. That's going to be for the big squares going up the center of the pattern. Then we have a 2.5-inch strip for the small diamonds, and then a partial 2.5-inch strip. Okay? So, like I said, I'm not subcutting these yet. I'm just going to leave them in their strips. And we're going to go ahead and start cutting fabric B. I'm going to do the pink. And this blue. Okay, this is fabric B. And we need 5 strips of 3.5 by 42. So I already squared up my fabric. I do have both layers here for both quilts. And again, we're doing 3.5-inch strips for the border. We need 5 of these. Okay, so we have 5 of those. Okay, so we can get 16 squares out of 1 strip. So we're going to need 2 strips at 2.5 inches wide to give us the 32 2.5 by 2.5 squares. So there's 1 strip and 2 strips. Now we need 6 4.5 by 4.5 squares. I'm gonna go ahead and cut one strip, 4.5 by 4.5, because we're also going to need 2 3 5/8 and 3 5/8 squares. So I'll take 2 of those 4.5 and I will subcut them down to the 3 5/8 that we need. Alright, so now we need 3 7 by 7 squares. So I'm gonna take this apart and I'm just gonna, I only want to cut what I actually need. There we go. So a 7-inch strip. We need 3 7 by 7 squares. So I'm gonna cut right about here. And then go over. So there's our, we should be able to get our 3 7 by 7 out of here. And I might even go ahead and subcut this 7 inches. I'm going to cut this edge off and square this up. And I'm going to cut 7 by 7. And I'm going to use this ruler. One, two, and 3. So that worked out good. Alright, so we got 3 7 by 7. I still have not subcut the other pieces yet. And I need to do the same thing over here. I need a... Okay, let's recap. Fabric B. We need 3 7 by 7 squares. We need 5 strips, 3.5 inches. So I have 5 strips of each color. Then we needed another 4.5 inch strip because we're going to need 6 4.5 by 4.5 squares. Plus we're going to need 2 3 5/8 by 3 5/8 squares. And we have 2 strips of 2.5 inch because we need 32 2.5 by 2.5 inch squares. So these 2 strips should give us the total of 32 2.5 inch squares we will need to do this. So let's move on to the next fabric. Okay, so I took all of the border fabrics, I set those aside, just so those are out of our way for the moment. And for the fabric C, we need a total of 56 rectangles, 2.5 by 6.5, and we need 42 rectangles, 2.5 by 4.5. So in the pattern, she has you cutting them all out as individual little rectangles, but I'm going to do mine a little bit different. So for the 4.5 inch rectangles, I'm just going to cut 2.5 inch strips, and then I will show you how I sew that and work that out. Okay, so I'm going to cut a couple of these. Okay, and you can see I have my blue fabric under here also. Now, the pattern tells us to take our 4.5 by 4.5 inch fabric A squares. So let's pretend this is 4.5 by 4.5. It tells us to take 4.5 inch squares and sew a 4.5 by 2.5 rectangle to each side. So instead of cutting all these out individually, I'm just going to take my fabric like this, and I'm going to sew down the side like that on that side, and I'm going to sew one on this side, and then I'm going to subcut into 4.5 inch. I just think that's faster than cutting each one out individually and sewing it on. So I'm going to do it like that, and then I'm going to do the same thing with this fabric. So I'm going to sew this on each side, and then I'll come back and show you what we need to do next. Okay, so I took the 2.5 inch strips, sewed it to the 4.5 inch strip. Now I'm going to subcut these into 4.5 inch sets. So first I'm going to line this up, make sure my seams line up, and I'm going to trim off this edge over here. Alright, so now we need 4.5 inch sets of these. And I'll be doing this to both of these. Okay, so doing it this way gave me 9 sets of these. I have a scrap here. I will definitely use that in something. And then remember this other little piece we cut? We're going to cut some more 2.5 inch strips because I need 3 more squares to go with each one of these. So I'm going to work on that, and then I'll be back. Okay, so I cut one more 2.5 inch strip. That 2.5-inch strip is going to give me what I need. If I cut it in half, it's going to give me what I need for both sides of this. So I'm going to cut this one in half. So now I have both pieces I need to do each side. So I'm going to sew those and subcut, press and subcut, and I'll be back. Okay, so this is what's left over. We should have 12 of these sets here like this. All right, so now we're going to move on. I'm going to put this in my scrap pile. I will use this, and I'm going to move on to the next step. Okay, so in the pattern we also have 6 4.5-inch squares of this color that we're going to need to sew 4.5-inch pieces to the side of those 4.5-inch squares. So we're basically doing the same thing to these two pieces that we did to the other pieces for the focus fabric. So I'm going to go ahead and work on that and sew those together. And when I am pressing, I'm pressing the center square to the outside, and then that's going to make a difference when we get to the next section, because we're going to press that to the inside so that when we have to sew that on, it's going to nest with this seam. Okay, also remember that when we cut these fabric B's, we also needed 2 3 5/8 by 3 5/8 inch squares. So I'm cutting that off of this strip because we only need 6 4.5-inch squares out of this piece. So I'm going to go ahead and cut the 2 3 5/8 by 3 5/8. So I'm going to cut my selvages off right here. And I'm going to get 2 3 5/8 squares. So I have this layered up so that it is going to cut 2 squares off of each piece of fabric. And we're doing 3 5/8. Okay, so I'm going to line this up. So I'm going to cut 3 5/8 here. So there's my 5/8. So basically I went from 3 inches and I counted over to 5 notches on the ruler. Let me see if I can zoom in for you. So I counted over 3 and then I counted 1 2 3 4 5 right there. And then I did the same thing on this corner. 3 1 2 3 4 5. And then I'm going to cut this. So there's the 3 5/8 squares. Now the rest of this, I'm sewing these on each side. So that's going to go on this side. And, well, actually that goes with the pink. This goes with this. So I'm going to cut another strip for the other side. Okay, so now we have 6 sets of these. So now we're going to move on. This is what's left over. So now we're going to move on, putting the other side of this on. And then we're going to do a shortcut on how to do that too. And I'll show you how we need to do that. Okay, so we have these 2.5-inch strips that we cut. We're going to need a 2.5-inch square here to go with this. We're going to need a 2.5-inch square in this side. So we're going to need a 6.5-inch piece of the white going this way. And then we're going to need a 6.5-inch piece going this way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this 6.5 inches, and then we're going to take this pink and I'm going to sew it on, and then we're going to subcut a 2.5-inch piece. Instead of cutting this in a bunch of little 2.5-inch squares and cutting each one of these individually like the pattern shows, I'm taking a shortcut. And then we're going to need to do the same thing with the blue. And I still have the blue under here. I made sure I kept it lined up. It's nice and neat. So we're looking at the 1/2-inch mark on this ruler. This ruler is 6 inches. So we're going to cut these 6.5. There we go. And we're only sewing it to one side. Not both sides, just one side, pink strip on one side. So let's do that. Okay, here's the sets that we made, and we need to put the other side of these on. So as I had explained, for this one we need a square here. So I'll subcut this at 2.5 inches, sew it on this side, and then the other one will flip and we'll have a square down this corner. So when I press the seams on this piece, I'm pressing all the seams toward the big piece, because on this we pressed it toward this piece. So now when we sew this on, our seams should nest really nice together. So we'll nest these together so that we get a nice seam there. So this square will be here, then we'll have one here, and we'll have one here. So I did that for all of these. I hope this makes sense to you, because I kind of altered the pattern just to make it a little bit faster for sewing. But you can see I have a set for here, a set for these, a set for these, and a set for these. So now we're going to subcut these to 2.5 inches. So I'm going to trim off the selvage So I'm lining up my seam with one of these lines on my ruler, and this edge of the seam should match this line on the ruler, and I'm going to cut that off. Now I'm going to cut every 2.5 inches. Okay, so remember when we cut out fabric A, the focus fabric, which was this and this? We needed 24 2.5 inch by 2.5 inch squares. So we cut one strip at 2.5 inches, which would have given us 16 2.5 by 2.5 squares. And then remember, we cut another piece out that would give us the total of 24 squares that we would need. So the extra piece that we cut out, we're adding onto this fabric C, because we are going to need 24 of these sets, because we have 12 of these and we have 12 of these. We need one for each side, so we need a total of 24 of these. So that's what the extra strip was for that we cut out. So I'm going to go ahead and now subcut these down to 2.5 inch strips. Okay, everything's cut, ready to go. Now, as a recap, we cut 6 of these units and we have 6 of these units. So we should have 12 of these and 12 of these, one for each side. We have 12 of these units, 12 of these units. We should have 24 of these units. Then I'm just going to sew these on each side. And then we're going to alternate so that this is what the block will look like when we're done. And again, we want to make sure we're nesting these seams as we sew. So we're going to fold this over. We're going to nest that seam together. And we're going to sew 1/4 inch seam allowance down this edge here. And then we're going to put this one on this side. We're going to nest the seams right here, and then we're going to sew on this side 1/4 inch. I'm going to do a couple of each one of these, and then I will show you what they look like and move on from there. Okay, so this is what the blocks are going to look like. So we have this one, this one, and then for the other quilt we have this and this. This is a great way to sit and chain piece these, so that's what I'm going to do now, is chain piece. I'm going to sew one side on, then go back and sew the other side on, and then we'll go over the rest of the quilt. Okay, so we have all of our blocks sewn together. I think they turned out pretty nice. So what we need to do now is work on the half block that's going to go down the side of the quilt. So I'm going to put these aside. And we're going to need 6 of these with the 6.5 inch piece attached. We should have 4 left over from when we were cutting out for the big block. So I had 4 left over of each one. We need a total of 6 of these. So we should have also had left over some of these pieces that were 6.5 inch wide. So we also should have another strip of this left over that we had cut. So I'm basically going to do the same thing with these pieces, that the way we sewed and cut out these. So I'm going to sew the pink strip to this. I'm going to sew this strip to this. So we need 2 more with the 6.5 inch fabric C, and we need 6 total of the 4.5 inch. So I'm gonna go ahead and sew these, and then I'll show you where we're at from there. Okay, so we need 2 more of the 6.5 inch ones. And now we need 6. We need 6 of the 4.5 inch ones. So we're going to be cutting 1 inch, 2 inches off the bottom of this. Okay, 1 more, and that was plenty enough fabric for that. We got this left over. Now I'm going to cut, so we can cut now these. We're going to cut 2 inches off. There we go. Got those. And I'm going to cut 2 inches off of these. And 2 inches off of these. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the pink. So we have 6 with 4.5 inch, and we have 6 with the 6.5 inch. So we'll do the same thing with the pink and white. Okay, so now we need to pull out the 7-inch blocks that we made, and we're going to work on the 6 half block triangles that we're going to be putting on the side of the quilt. So I stacked up all 3 of my 7-inch blocks, and we are going to cut directly down the center this way. Then we're going to turn and we're going to cut this way also. Two of these we will not need. We can save that for another project. We're going to need 6 for the sides. Okay, and now we have 4 left over. That's going to be for the next step. So I'm going to go ahead and do that with the blue ones. Okay, I had to check the pattern again. So we're going to sew this onto this corner like this. And then we're going to open this up. And then we're going to take the longer one and sew it on like that. And then I'll get back to you and we'll see how that looks. Okay, so here is the block so far. And I did press the seam toward the triangle because I feel that that's going to be easier to do when you sew the other piece on. Press it toward the triangle, because what we're going to do is line the ruler up with the edge of this triangle. We're going to be cutting across here to make our side triangles. Okay, so I have all of these sewn, and our next step is to line the ruler up with the edge of the triangle, and then we're going to cut these pieces off. So I'll do all these. And I'll be back. Okay, so the next step in this is we're going to need our 4 triangles that we had left over. This is for the top and bottom half square chandelier block that's going to go on the top and bottom of the quilt. So we're going to sew a 6.5-inch piece of fabric C onto our triangle. Then that's going to get pressed back, and then we're going to attach a 6.5-inch fabric C to the 2.5-inch block, and we're going to sew that on, nesting the seams. This seam and this seam is going to get nested together, and then when that opens up, that's what we're going to have. So we're going to do this for all 4 triangles we have left over for this quilt. Okay, so we have the top and bottom half blocks ready. I have everything seamed together. This is what it's going to look like when you're done. You want to have the pink square to the top, and I have a blue one done also, so you can see what that looks like. And we're going to do the same thing with these that we did with this half block. We're going to line the ruler up on this line, the bottom of your triangle. We're going to cut off these pieces hanging out. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and continue on and do that until they're all done. Okay, so we have the 4 3 5/8 squares left over that we need to do something with. So this is going to make the 4 corners. So the pattern has us cutting these diagonally in half. That's going to give us 4 pieces. Okay? Then it states that we need to fold this in half and just kind of pinch or mark the center. Or if you want to mark it with a pen, you can mark it with a pen. And then we're going to need 4 6.5 inch by 2.5 inch fabric C. And we're going to need 4 of fabric B to match these corners, 2.5 inch by 2.5 inch. And I'm going to sew these onto this. So you can see those how I'll have their little centers marked. If you can see my creases in there. So I'm going to sew these together and then I'll show you the next step. Okay, so with these pieces in our triangle, we have it marked halfway through. We also need to fold these in half and we need to mark it, the center of it. So I'm pinching down here on this corner, and then we're going to match up those creases that we made. And it's going to go like this. This is going to go on the left of the triangle. So I need to put the crease on the other side. So maybe make a mention of that. Triangle should be on the left. I'm going to line those up. We're going to sew this together with those creases lined up just like that. We're going to sew the triangle on to this piece. And then once we get that sewn together, then we're going to cut along this edge. And this is going to get cut off. So let me do that and we'll move on to the next step, which I think we're very close to assembly. Okay, so I sewed this on. I did 2 of them. I didn't press it yet, but I did 2 of them with the square to the left. Then we're going to do 2 of them with the square, the pink square to the right. And we're going to put this on top like this. So, and it's going to look like this, but the pink square is going to be on the other side. Okay, this is what they look like. Okay, the pattern has us cutting the edge off where the pink square is. So I'm going to cut this off. So I'm lining up my ruler with this edge. We're going to cut that off. So with this one, it's the opposite side. That's going to be our corner. Now we have all of our pieces. I believe that we need to construct this. So these are the top and bottom. We have our sides, and then we have our center square. Okay, here we go. This is all the pieces sewn together. I think I'm pretty happy with it. I like the colors. I made it for somebody in particular. So these were her favorite colors. Then again, remember, we're going to have a border. So the first border is going to be this pink. And then the outside border is going to be this black floral here. And then the back of it's going to be a black and white floral print also. And the binding is going to be black. But that is it all together. It came together pretty quick, taking the shortcut that I took as far as sewing the pieces together and not cutting out all those individual pieces. But I'm pretty happy with it. But to sew this together, we're going to sew it by rows diagonally. So this piece will get sewn to this piece, and this piece will get sewn to this piece. And then so on. This piece gets sewn to this piece, gets sewn to this piece, gets sewn to this piece, and gets sewn to that piece. And then you're going to sew this corner piece on. And then keep going for that row. And then you just keep moving along your rows. And then once you have the rows assembled, then you just sew it down, then sew all the rows together to make one big piece. So I'm pretty happy with it. I like it. For a free pattern, I like it a lot. I've been wanting to make a chandelier quilt. I just like the pattern. I just like the way it looks. But anyhow, let's get it sewn up. Okay, now that we have the quilt laid out the way we need it, I'm going to start sewing these pieces together. My machine's been acting up on me, so I hope I don't have any problems with. I'm going to use a leader. So I'm going to cut off the leader, and I'm going to grab the next square. You can pin these if you want, so you're not trying to get it together at the machine. Next one. you're sewing these rows together, I'll be pressing one row one direction, the next row I'm going to press the other direction so that these will nest together neatly. Let's see, which way does this go? This is one of the end pieces, one of the side units that we made. Make sure everything lines up nice. So I'm using a leader because sometimes when you're sewing a 1/4 inch seam allowance, when you're trying to push your fabric through, both bottom feed dogs aren't picking up the fabric. So you can see where this feed dog on the right is just shy of picking this up and trying to feed it through. So I have a lot of trouble with my fabric getting stuck down underneath the plate, and then I have to try to pull it out, and then I end up with all kinds of like thread jams underneath my plate. So I started using this in hopes that I can feed this through and then get this underneath there so it doesn't get stuck down in there. And especially when you're working with small points like right here, when you're trying to feed this through, these little points, they get stuck down inside there. So I'm trying to eliminate that. That's what this leader helps you do, so you don't have troubles like that. But here's one row. I'm going to work on the next one. Okay, last few pieces we need to do. I like sewing this part because you don't have to line up any seams. This piece. Okay, so all I have left is the little corner to put right there on this piece. Okay. So now I'm going to press everything, and then we're going to start on assembling the rows. Okay, so I got everything pressed. I pressed all the important seams so that they line up with the bottom or with the next row. I pressed them in opposite directions, and I did put some pins in here just to kind of help hold those intersections together so that they match up. So basically that's what we're gonna do to sew this part together. And I don't like to sew over my pins. Okay, let's see how this looks. Alright, that's one corner. I think those lined up really nice. Definitely helps to pin it. I'm pretty excited with this so far. So I'm just going to keep doing that, and I'll let you see how it looks when I'm all done. But I'm liking this so far. Looks really good. And of course, after I'm done, I will press these also. Alright. Okay, it's all assembled. It's all ready to go for our borders. I think it turned out really cute. But I did press it real good and starch it a little bit. But so far I am liking it. So let's get started on the borders. Okay, so I am putting on the side borders first. Needle in the down position. put on the other side. Okay, so now you can see I have the side borders on. And you can see how they lined up at these points right here. So it looks pretty good. And I did have to piece this together, these side pieces. So you can see right here where I sewed a piece onto this to make it fit. But now I'm going to do the top and bottom. And I think it's looking really good. So let's work on that. Okay, all 4 pink borders are on. And I really like the way everything lined up. So far, it is looking really good. So I'm going to proceed with the black border. So just like I did with the pink border, I'm going to sew these together so that they will fit down the side edge. And I'm just putting them together like this. And I'm going to trim off this excess. And I'm going to press this seam down. And I'm going to sew this down the side of the quilt top. And then I will do the same for the other side. And then we'll do the top and bottom. Okay, all the borders are on. And I think it just looks absolutely gorgeous. All I have to do now is quilt it. And I will do a separate video on that. But I'm really pleased with the way it turned out. Okay, there is the final reveal. I think it's beautiful. I just got to get it quilted now. I'll be taking care of that within the next week or so after I get acquainted with my new machine. So yeah, let me know if you have any questions or comments or anything like that. I'd be happy to answer them. Alright, thank you for watching. Happy sewing.